Hello, everyone. Welcome back to this week's Cedarville Stories Podcast. I'm Mark Weinstein, and I believe you're in store for a great conversation today with my guests Mark and Dawn Brown from Hawaii, and with my co-host Greg Thompson, professor of criminal justice at Cedarville University. You may recall the devastating fires in 2023 that destroyed more than 3,000 homes and killed more than 100 people along Maui's west coast of Lahaina. Mark and Dawn live in that part of Hawaii, and we'll talk about the tragic event and how the Lord sustained them through their journey. I think you're really going to be inspired by their story. So let me welcome Mark and Dawn Brown with Greg Thompson to this week's Cedarville Stories Podcast. Before we dive into today's podcast, the depth of the podcast, I think it's important to get to know both Mark and Dawn. I know, Mark, you're from Hawaii. Dawn is from my home state of Michigan. So you met in your junior year at Cedarville. Dawn was studying business communication technology. That's what she got her degree in. Mark wanted to be a pharmacist. We didn't have a school of pharmacy at that time. We do now. So you studied biology. So when you look at your Cedarville education, and I know Mark went on elsewhere, how did the Lord use your education to prepare you for what you have been doing in life today in Hawaii?
It was a good stepping stone for me for the background that I received in biology and science. And, the Christian foundation was really something that impressed me.
Yeah.
One of the first things I noticed was you pray almost every beginning of each class. So when I went to University of Toledo, my first year, I kind of, first class, popped my head, no, we don't do that here. So that was a little different, so that was really the chapels and the campus and everything. Like, it's just amazing, the friendliness of everyone. And, I never felt that I wasn't at home while I was at Cedarville.
Wow. Mm-hmm. How about you, Dawn?
The business communication technology was the communication part was a stretch for me because I'm pretty shy by nature. So I think that really helped going out into the real world as far as getting my confidence up to be able to be a better communicator.
Yeah, that's great.
And just being around in that community, the Cedarville community, was an awesome thing.
As I said in the introduction, Mark wanted to be a pharmacist. So obviously you went to Toledo for pharmacy school. Specifically, when you look today, Mark, at Cedarville University and knowing that we now have a school of pharmacy, how important is it in your mind that our students are not only receiving the same kind of education you receive, maybe better, but they're getting it from a biblical worldview? How important is that in your mindset?
I think it's really important. There's so much in the world that's in the science world where, evolution is like just expected to be believed, and even how things work in the body and all that, it just happens. And I would have loved to have had that education about what would center on Christ and really, the creation that's there rather than just chance and
right.
And that, that would have been something I would have enjoyed. I actually came to Cedarville as a pre-med student.
Okay.
So I changed, after I left Cedarville, so to pharmacy.
When I think about your education in your life, I know Lila, one of your daughters today, is a Cedarville student. When she made the decision to come to Cedarville, what thoughts went through your heart and mind, knowing that what kind of education she's going to receive here at Cedarville?
I guess you could use the term tickled pink. Because we never really forced where the kids were going to be going to school. We let them choose entirely on their own. We gave them some guidelines and whatnot, but we felt that this is something that they need to want to, a place they want to be.
Yeah. So let's get back to the story. The story for today is the fire that happened in Lahaina and how it's impacted you personally, how it's impacted the people of Lahaina. So for background purposes, can you share with us the experiences during those days where the fire was ravaging Lahaina?
It was a typical morning. I had gotten up to go to work. I was actually at work opening when the power went out. And can't really serve food with no power. So they sent us out home. And I got home and I found Lila hiding in the bathroom with our dog because the wind was so strong coming through her bedroom window. It sounded like she described it as like an elephant coming through her window. I mean, it was just a loud, shrill noise. And it was, our dog wasn't doing well with that noise. So that's where I found her. So I took her into the bigger bathroom and got her comfortable in there. And we just kind of waited out the day with no communications, no power at all. And I just remember looking outside, like, where's this wind coming from? Where is this wind coming from? So I had no idea that we had a thing going on out there.
Yeah, there was a hurricane about 300 miles southwest of Hawaii.
Okay.
And pretty strong Cat 4 hurricane. And then northeast of Hawaii was a high pressure system. So basically it was just wind going downhill, coming, towards Maui. We knew that there was a red flag warning for, several days. They told us that there was going to be an event, but we have those all the time. So it really wasn't something that we were that concerned about. Yeah. But just the way Maui is situated and the winds were hitting through the valley coming from the other side through the mountains, that just accelerated the winds. So we were actually having hurricane force winds most of the day.
Yeah. And we had just missed each other, me coming home and he had to go to the airport. And I'm like, surely he's not off Maui because they can't fly in this weather. I just thought it was like that on the whole island, how windy it was.
Yeah.
So we just kind of hunkered down and stayed in place. But there had been a fire early in the morning, which I was aware of. And then it seemed clear. So we noticed smoke again later, and we were just keeping an eye on it.
Yeah.
And then Lila determined, we really need to go because we always err on the side of caution with fires and allergies and whatnot. And where we had to get out of would be a bottleneck. So we made the decision to leave and go on up to the school where Lila attends. We usually would go to the church, but 5 years ago, we were in a situation where we were there and we got stuck between two fires.
Okay.
So I decided, next time I'm just going to go right to the school. And thank God, because without that experience 5 years prior, we would have been at the church and had to been evacuating again.
Wow.
So when we left, it was pretty smoky already. The visibility was low. And thankfully, we left exactly when we did, though, because somebody in the same complex that we did left not too long behind us and had a hard time even seeing where the roads were. Just leaving our complex.
How long was the fire raging? Was it all day? Was it multiple days?
Started about the first fire started about 6 a.m, and the fire crews were up there and then put it out. They actually said it was extinguished, and they just sat on there just in case that would flare back up till noon. And they left and was at lunch when they got called saying the fire had started again. So about 2:00, and it raged into overnight and was pretty much out, mid-morning the next day. It was, swept by the wind, so it moved very quickly.
Right.
And, they said at the beginning of the fire, it was moving at 60 miles an hour.
Wow.
Which is pretty, for the small, part of Lahaina, that's swept through it pretty quickly.
Yeah. So in many ways, it was a perfect storm. It was the hurricane winds with the fire that really strengthened what you guys experienced.
Don, having been to Maui a number of times myself, I know that I sit in traffic routinely, just without a fire and emergency tragedy like this, because of the one road coming around the mountains in West Maui. So how were you guys able to get out? You mentioned you left early thanks to your discussion with Lila to go ahead and evacuate. But how long did it take you to get out? And what was that like?
It took a little under an hour. Technically, we thought we were leaving early, but at the time that we were leaving was when the fire truck that was in trouble. Looking back at the timeline, that's when they were going through that hard time, just even knowing if they were going to live through the fire. Mm-hmm. So in our mind, we thought it was early, but it was in the midst of all this. We were sitting outside in the traffic, not moving. And I realized it was going to be like that, but nobody was coming out of Lahaina. So I jumped into that oncoming lane and I'm like, oh Lord, please forgive me.
Wow.
You're being an example to your child too. and I got into that lane and went up, and then we were merging with the lane coming down the mountain. But people got right behind me and started doing that as well. If not for that, it would have taken us a lot longer. But then they just started splitting us up to go towards Front Street and then in front of the Safeway complex. And then we merged on Front Street at that point when, and we were set in front so we could actually see, more of what was going on up the mountain. But we're just looking back in it too, the fact that the winds were carrying the fire away from us. Typically, it would have probably come straight down the hill. And if it had come straight down the hill, it would have been a whole different scenario for us because it would have been in our house
much faster.
Within minutes, probably.
And I know Lila was kind enough to share this story with our Cedarville team. And so I can, because she took some video, I can picture a little bit of that. And she showed us pulling into this Safeway parking lot, which is covered in smoke. So I know it's hard to discuss this. So thank you, first of all. How did you find out what happened to your home? I guess this is for Mark to give you a breakdown.
Well, I'll go through my scenario.
Oh yeah, that's right. Because you have a little different story, Mark. Where were you at?
Yeah. So I was scheduled actually to work on Kauai that day. So I had scheduled, set my alarm for 5:00 in the morning. The electricity went out at 4:55. So I woke up, got ready in the dark, and left the house about 5:30. And already the power lines were about 45 degrees, starting to almost block the roads. And so I got out, right? I saw a policeman come in with his lights. He was about to shut down the road. And so I got out just in time. And so I went to the airport, flew to Kauai. There's no wind at all in Kauai. And so I had no idea what was going on in Maui. And until I was flying back and going through Oahu, about to land on Oahu, and I hadn't turned my phone off like I was supposed to, and it rang as we're landing. And so quickly I turned it off, and when I landed, Don had left me a message saying, it's not looking good. There's a fire, it's not looking good, and we're going to try to evacuate to the Maui Prep school. And so when I landed, I tried to call, and I couldn't get her. I texted, emailed, and couldn't get a hold of her. So then I left Oahu to fly to Maui, and about 5 minutes into the flight, which is a 30-minute flight, I could start seeing black smoke out of the window of the airplane.
Wow.
Once we went over Lanai, you make a turn to get into the flight path to land, and could see Lahaina, and it's starting to get a little bit, darker, and I just saw flames that looked like they're 100 feet in the air and black, dark smoke. And we'd seen a lot of fires around Lahaina before. And I just knew that this looked a lot different, and not knowing what it was, at that point. And of course, when I landed, continued to try to call, and I was able to get a hold of my parents when I landed, that they had made it out because they came out through the Kahului side. So went through the night not knowing. I spent the night at the pharmacy on the internet all night, looking at the videos that were coming out. And I'd gone to Target actually to buy some clothes for the next day and toiletries, and I'd never seen it like that before. People just had carts full of stuff, just piling things in carts, and all I could hear them saying was, "Lahaina's gone." And I was just like, "What do you mean Lahaina's gone?" I says, "It's burnt to the ground." And I just could not comprehend what they were saying, but you could see on their face that something really bad had happened. Well, so all that night I was at the pharmacy, just not knowing, continuing to call, continuing to texting until 6:00 in the morning. Dawn got through her phone. Actually, she found a spot that she got all my texts at once. And so she called me right away. And so at 6 a.m. is when I found out that they were okay.
How did you get through that tough night? I mean, one, your city is gone, relatively speaking. You can't connect. You haven't been able to connect with Dawn or your daughter. How did you make it through that night?
I don't really know. I just, it was a tough night. Of course, you're praying and that, but really had no idea.
Yeah.
And just knowing that, you'll find out more in the morning, but not knowing what that's going to be. And so it was a long, hard night.
How difficult for you, Dawn, to not be able to connect with Mark?
One of the worst things about it was there was no way to communicate.
Yeah.
You had no way of knowing if the fire's still going or where it is, And actually, the first night we stayed there at the school, and the second night they put us in a teacher's home. But by the time we got there, it was dark, evening time. I had really no concept of where I was, and not knowing what was going on with the fire. I'd say that was the worst night for me, the second night, because I've never had a panic attack in my life before. But lying there next to Lila, who's sleeping, I just had this, like an elephant on my chest and could barely breathe. And I was just praying, Lord, what's going on, what's happening. And, please show me somehow that things are going to be okay. And right then it started raining where we were in the Pele. And it just brought such a peace over me. And then I was able to fall asleep at that time.
God brought a tangible way to show you he's there through the rain. So let's move the story forward a little bit, okay? So now your house is gone. Where did you live immediately? And then how many times have you had to move even to this day?
Well, we're on our 10th place to live. The first couple of nights, we both were in different places, so that was 4 places in the first 2 days.
Okay.
And we were in a shelter for a week and a half or so, and then we moved to...
Together?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so Thursday we met up.
Okay.
So that's when we actually knew for sure our place was gone, because Dawn and Lila drove out that day and drove by it, and they had video of when they saw that it was gone. And so we met up that afternoon, and so 10 days at the shelter, and then through friends we had a place that we stayed for
about a month.
And then we went into the hotel system where we went from hotel to hotel. And then in January, we finally got the location that we're renting now.
Okay.
Which is, 1 bedroom, about 580 square feet, got a place where, the three of us, Lila, Don, and I, have been since then.
Yeah. What's your long-term plan? Are you going to go back to your old property and rebuild, or what's the hope?
Yeah, we own an apartment building that. In the apartment complex, there were 7 buildings and 2 of them were destroyed. And so actually tomorrow they're going to start the process of rebuilding. So we've finally got the permits. That took a while. And so they're saying it's about 2 years out before the buildings will be complete. So between now and then, we're probably going to be staying where we're at now, hopefully.
Okay.
And we have a pretty good relationship with our landlord. So we're hoping to stay here.
The city is destroyed. You lose your house, but even added to it, your dad's a pastor of a church. The church was destroyed by fire.
Right.
Speak to the emotional strain of losing all that, because that's a high magnitude of devastation.
It is. I mean, just for perspective, our church is pretty small. On a very big day, we used to have maybe 100 people in the service.
Okay.
And 13 of our families lost their homes. So we have 3 pastors. All 3 of the pastors lost their homes in the church. And so it's just hard to imagine, and the first Sunday after the church, one of our members owns a coffee shop in Wailuku, which is about a half an hour away from Lahaina. And he opened that up for us to have church in. And we've been meeting there every Sunday from right after the fire. So
while the church was destroyed by fire, there's a small mango tree that's outside of the church, and that survived the fire. I'm wondering I wonder if that's kind of like in your mind, when you see that, a small remnant of God's power and grace in your lives.
Yeah, just a little backstory. My dad has said many times from the pulpit, talking about church, that the church is not this building that we're sitting in. He said if all of us got up and went and sat underneath the mango tree, the church would be under the mango tree. And that's something we all had heard many, many times, and kind of roll your eyes, and we know that, but it became something that really meant a lot more, knowing that there is a tree there, but the church is still here.
Yeah.
Even though the building's flat, we do have the church is meeting still. God's still with us.
Mm. Yeah. Mark and Don, I really appreciate when we brought our Cedarville students there, Mark, you took us to that property. And I got to see that tree, and our students got to see that tree, and how powerful it is that God is our sustainer and our provider, and also a reminder of what the church is. I love that. Thank you for sharing through your tragedy. That a question here along with that example for you or Don: how have you seen God sustain you since the fires? What kind of what could you tell us to encourage us as you guys come out of this tragedy?
One thing, I've been in church a long time, and I've always heard about living day by day. And you think you do that. You think you understand that. Until this happened, I didn't really understand that, no, you need to trust God for everything. Mm. And there were several days, especially at the very beginning, I didn't know we were going to sleep. As the man of the house, you should be able to take care of that, right? Mm. And especially that third night when Dawn and Lila came and met with, it came out, I really did not know where we were going to stay. And through circumstance, and my brother's chaplain for Samaritan's Purse, and he flew in, and through that he was able to get us in a shelter that they were staying in, and that's actually where Greg and the team stayed when they were on Maui, Made in Hope, and just the sustaining. You have nothing all of a sudden.
Yeah.
But it was never a time that, we did have something to eat and someplace to sleep, and, God took care of all of that.
Yeah, even for Lila and myself, leaving the way we did, she managed to have some dog food for the dog, but we had nothing I had my thing of water that I happened to carry out of the house, but God provided even that very first night, because the janitor's school was supposed to start the next day, and the janitor had gotten permission to bring some food to use the grill up there to feed his family. And he provided a meal for us that night. Since we were there, they invited us to come eat with them. So just from that very first night, God took care of us. He gave us a place to sleep, a safe place. At 10:30 that night, the principal came running in the room, and he said, "Dawn, where are you?" And advised us that the school was now a shelter. So that he's like, "You're going to hear noise, but you're safe. No one's coming in the preschool with you." And this is after we had a meal, So God showed us right from that first night that he's going to take care of us. And all along the way, every step of the way, we might have lost hope. Like, okay, we have 10 days to leave this hotel. Now where are we going to go? God has been faithful, and he's taken care of us every step.
That's so encouraging. Mark and Dawn and Greg, we are nearing the end of this podcast, and there's a lot more questions I want to ask. So I'm going to say we'll do another podcast next week and talk about this story and then the students coming out to Cedarville. But before we get there, let me ask Greg, what was the inspiration for you to develop a team of 14 from Cedarville University to go out to Lahaina to serve and care for these people during spring break?
Well, I think they serve and cared for us a whole lot more than we did them. But it's an amazing story of what God has done. I think our whole team got to see this, but it started, I was thinking back, I think it started just with Mark and Dawn and I meeting. And the reason we met is because they were here for Getting Started weekend with their daughter. And we had reached out as Hawaiians to Hawaiians. Welcoming people is important in the culture. And so my son, who came here to Cedarville while I lived in Hawaii, kind of remembered what that was like. And he said, "Dad, we need to welcome the Hawaiians." And so I found the Brown family. We reached out, we met with them. And that was when I met Mark. He said, "I'm from Lahaina." And my heart dropped. And I didn't know that was the conversation I was about to have that day. And Mark and Dawn just shared their story. And it's obviously, as you just heard it's an incredible story of tragedy and loss. I couldn't imagine it. And actually, I don't know if I told you this, Mark. I might have. I ended up in the hospital a day after that conversation. I actually had pneumonia. I got admitted to the hospital. I was there for 4 days. And it just God's timing. During those 4 days, my friends from Hawaii who I'd done ministry with were texting me about Maui. They said, "Hey man, things are still happening there. Recovery is still going on. Lives are being touched. We just brought a group from Oahu, where I had lived, to Maui, and it made a big difference." I said, "Would it be helpful if we brought a Cedarville group there?" And he said, "Absolutely," which kind of surprised me. And then I was thinking about our conversation, and then it kind of developed from there, to be honest, Mark. The story goes on, but God just began to blow open doors all the way through to the point where I'm with Mark in Maui, showing me where his house used to be and where his church building used to be, and showing me a mango tree.
An amazing story. We are out of time. One last question, though. Before I get to that, this is a very tragic story. We can all agree on it, but we also can all agree that it's a God story. How He has come alongside you and everyone else and sustained you and given you what you needed for that day. And as I look at you guys, I look at Greg, I look at our studio audience, you know, there's a little bit of emotion in this story, and I can see it on our faces, which I just got. And I'm just so encouraged that your faith stayed strong during probably the worst days of your life. And I want to thank you for being that example to us and to those on the podcast. My last question before we wrap is to Mark and Dawn. So the Cedarville students team of 14 with Greg and Patrick Oliver as well, how meaningful was that for you guys to have a team from Cedarville to come out for a week to do whatever you needed them to do because they were willing to do whatever you wanted them to do?
Yeah, it's amazing to see how God has sent people from all over to help.
Right.
Story that I'm on a disaster medical team, a federal team where we go all over for helping during disasters. And I've been, to Sandy and New York City and Key West and as far as Saipan, lots of places in between for tragedies. And early on, Lila actually asked me, why do you do this? She was probably, 5 or 6 at that time. And I said, one of these days we're going to need help. And I want people to come help us. And just can't imagine all the people that have stepped up and shown up and helped. And not just the first few days of the fire, but, even now people helping. And it's just been amazing to see that.
And that's the role of the body of Christ, to come alongside in every situation. Mark and Dawn, I've enjoyed hearing your story. Greg, thanks for joining me as a co-host. There's still more of this story to tell. So join us next week, and we'll finish this story. We'll talk about the mission trip of the Cedarville students going out to Lahaina and really serving and dig deeper into that story. But for now, Mark and Dawn, thanks for joining me this week on the Cedarville Stories Podcast. It was great to meet you. Thank you for listening to the Cedarville Stories Podcast, brought to you by Cedarville University. Be sure to come back next week when we'll share another Cedarville story for God's glory.